Can you hear at the back?
Yeah.
Thank you, Sinai.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Oh, what? Oh, come on.
We should give them that.
Right, can we get a new lamp over here, please?
Anyone have a
Alright, well, if the projector gives out halfway through, then we know why. So yeah, we're talking about JavaScript in Magento 2 today, and we're going to go over everything. We've got an hour. We're going to start at the beginning and go hopefully all the way to the end. So I don't know how much you've worked with JavaScript in Magento 2 before, but certainly in the beginning for us it felt kind of like this. You're the person just trying to do your bowling, and this is Magento coming in to get there. Yeah, right. That's hopefully you'll feel better than that at the end of this talk. So just a run through of what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, great. So probably you're wondering why we have onions here, and you probably heard this that Magento is like an onion because it has a lot of layers, and you cry when you peel them off. And it's actually very much true for Magento 2. I think it's even better onion. So what we want to do, we want to try to uncover those layers for you, so you don't need to cry and you feel more confident what's going on. So we structure our presentation for several topics, and Max is going to tell about what has changed in Magento 2 in terms of the JavaScript framework. Also, we're going to show you ingredients for success, which are Require.js, JavaScript components, jQuery UI widgets, and UI apps.
Right, so let's get going. So the whole talk is basically what's changed, right? But we can go through a few headlines now. We got rid of prototype in Magento 2. Yay! Except we mostly got rid of prototype. If you use the Google Tag Manager, you still got prototype on every single page.
It's hidden.
Yeah, it's called legacy.min.js. Talk about legacy, right? We got rid of inline scripts, which is great for performance, for security, and generally not writing your code like a person who doesn't know how to write code. We mostly got rid of inline scripts. The swatches, yeah. We don't have JavaScript at the head anymore. We're smarter about it in Magento 2. We actually load our JavaScript after our content because that's me. Sorry. Because we're smart, we load our JavaScript after the content because the content is more important. And we don't pollute the global scope with variable names anymore, unless you're doing something really wrong. You shouldn't be. And then, yeah, the aforementioned whole bunch of new stuff that we're going to talk about. So we are actually going through this in layers, and each chapter of this talk kind of builds on the stuff that goes before it. And we're going to open it up with the lowest level of this. The innermost bit of this onion, Require.js. Require.js is a JavaScript module loader. It loads JavaScript modules. And it's new to Magento, but it's not new to the web development industry in general, right? 1.0 came out in 2011, and it hasn't changed that much since then. So it's responsible in Magento 2 for loading all of your JavaScripts. If you've got JavaScript on your page, it came through Require.js, probably. And the way it does this is it loads a module, and you've got a module, and it's got dependencies, and it loads those dependencies, and it loads those module dependencies, and it loads those module dependencies. It does this 600 times, and then it starts executing them so that you know when you run your code, all of your code has everything it needs to work, so you're not going to get jQuery being undefined, or you're not going to anything you get like that. There are all kinds of errors you get from Magento 1 not giving you flexibility in loading order. So yeah, Marcin's going to talk about what exactly a module looks like in Require.js.
Yeah, so how many of you actually heard about this term AMD before? That's great. Awesome, so that's not going to be a problem for you working with Magento 2, but for those who are not very much familiar with what is that, it's definitely not a cheap manufacturer, and it's a synchronous module definition. So if you are in the JavaScript world, I must mention, you got a common JS notification, which is considered to be for servers, and you got AMD, which is considered to be browser side. So this is the actual preferred format for require.js. So all modules needs to be in this format, and then require.js will understand what to do with them. And obviously Magento, they implemented it across the whole framework, which is great. And you might find quite a lot of examples of that. So I'll try to show you a little snippet of code. So we obviously removed quite a lot of code from it, so it's much clearer. But I want to show you the sections, how this code is actually built, what does it mean. So you're not scared off by that. So the first section is a require.js, which you execute at the very beginning. And this method has 2 arguments, where the first one is the array of your dependencies. So you can define jQuery or underscore any other dependencies you might have. Also, you can include plugins in there, but we're not gonna talk about it. You can definitely check plugins. For example, DOM-ready, which is quite useful.
Good exercise for the viewer.
Yeah, definitely. So this is your list of dependencies as an array, and this is your actual module. So as you can see, you have a function which has a name, and then has parameters which are exactly the same as your dependencies. So your dependencies are mapped into function arguments. You can call it whatever you want, but obviously for sake of ease, jQuery is $, because everyone knows $ is jQuery, and underscore is underscore, and so on. But there's nothing stops you to name it whatever you want, but obviously there are some conventions you should follow. So once this function is defined, obviously there's a body of the function where you put all your code in. So just to sum it up, to define an AMD module, you write a function, and then this function will be called where your module is loaded and all dependencies are loaded. So you don't need to worry about any other modules you need, because require.js will do that for you. At the moment where a function is executed, all the dependencies are resolved for you, which is great. So you won't have any 404 errors or unknown objects or undefined variables. And what's really important here to know, that actually by creating this function, you are defining your public API. So in Magento to work, if you work with Magento, they talk about web API and API and API. And this interface actually is here as well. So when you're writing your function, you are telling the word, okay, this is my new module, and this module is exposing those kind of functions, those kind of properties, so anyone else can use your module as a dependency for something else. So, okay, going forward, I already talked about that this is loaded after your content. I'm repeating that because this is actually a big change to Magento 2, that everything is asynchronous, and the content is loaded first, customer already see the page, and then JavaScript is executed, which is great for the speed. Also, there's a separation of concerns. Probably you all remember, Magento 1 templates hacked all over the place, where you have PHP, HTML, JavaScript, inline everywhere, total mess. So this way of writing actually separates the concerns. So template is responsible for templating, and your data is going in, or your code, JavaScript code, goes to the separate files. Also, there's no global scope pollution, because your new module is encapsulated really nicely inside the small structure. It's not polluting any variables. You are not conflicting with anything. So,
right. So, just want to go back to AMD. That dependency array. There's potentially quite a lot going on there. We requested jQuery, and magically, the require.js somehow just knows that obviously we want jQuery, because everyone knows that's a library and that's how it works. No, that's not how it works. There's no magic going on here whatsoever, but there is a set of rules of how does require.js know what jQuery is, or collapsible, or mage / translate, or Magento _ checkout / js / view / sidebar, which I had to make smaller, otherwise it would fit on the slides. we're going to take that last example first, because that's the boring one. So, in general, required JS modules are specified by a portion of their URL. And you can see here, this is a typical looking static file URL for a Magento 2 site. We've got the base URL, and then we have /static, because that's where our static assets live. Front end is the area. Magento is the theme vendor. Luma is our theme name. Then we've got our locale, and we're localized to Magento Poland today. And then there's the other stuff off the street. Well, it's the other stuff that we're actually interested in. That base URL is configured by Magento. And required.js knows that it uses that every time. It's this bit at the end, minus that file extension, sorry. That is the module name, and that's how required.js by default will know which file to load. Whatever you request, it puts .js on the end and it puts the base URL in front of it, and off it goes. Except not quite. There's more as well.
Okay, so obviously when we requested jQuery, it was a really short name, so there was no path or anything like that. So how actually required.js knows where to look? And Magento have a really good solution for that. And that can be configured by a mapping. And this is not a Magento thing. This is actually a required.js thing. And you can check it on the required.js documentation site, how the config looks like. And the file, which is called by Magento required.js config.js, is a symlink of a web directory. So please be careful with location of this file, because if you put it incorrectly, you might have unexpected results that you actually defined your mapping, but your module cannot be found. So, Max said never done that. Oh yeah, no, for sure. So, also what's really interesting there, that Magento will find all those files from all the modules, and it will merge it into one massive required.js config, which is passed by this class. So if you want to see how it looks like, I strongly encourage you to go there. But what's really important there, you can easily overwrite things in there. So here it is. This is our config. You can see it's a simple object with the map property. And what you can notice there is a star. But I promise I'm not going to talk about it. You just need to put a star. Or if you are interested in what it actually does, why it's star there, you should check it. And then you define your dependencies on your mappings. So, for example, the collapsible is made collapsible. And this is how required.js understands what's going on there. Okay, so we wrapped up the required.js and everything related to how modules are specified. Right now we can go into more interesting stuff.
Sure. So, if you've been following along so far, we've answered a lot of questions about how to load JavaScript onto the page, but we haven't answered the most important question, which is, okay, fine, if I've got a module and it's got dependencies, they get loaded, but how do I load my module in the first place? It's not just living in this vacuum of perfect modularity, we need some kind of input and output. Magento did think of this, and they came up with a pretty nice solution actually. So this is a bit of Magento special sauce on top of required.js and AMD, and it's called a JavaScript component. And this is your basic unit of functionality in a Magento 2 store from a JavaScript point of view. And it comes in two parts. We've got a definition, which is essentially an AMD file. And we've got a declaration, which is an instruction to Magento to load this file onto our page. So we're going to take a look at the definition.
Okay. So as we go forward, we're going to use the knowledge from the previous slides, so we can talk about more advanced stuff. So basically, your JavaScript component is an AMD module I showed you before, which has no dependencies, returns a function, and this function always takes two parameters. It takes a configuration object, and we're going to talk about it later. What is that object? Where's that coming from? And also, it takes a HTML element, which is bind to this module. So, if you look at that, you can recognize similar things we had before. So you have define, you have your function. But what's really important here we got config and config object and the element, and then we return our public API.
Right, so that's the definition, and then the instruction to load this on the page doesn't go in the layout XML where you'll be used to loading JavaScript if you've done a lot of stuff like this in Magento 1. We actually code these declarations in the template, and just this is not co-locating our JavaScript in the template like I just said we don't do anymore. This is much more declarative, and our code is in a separate file. What it actually is a piece of JSON that tells Magento to load this file and pass in these arguments. We'll take a look at it because showing is the best way. So it comes inside a script tag, but the key here is that if a script tag has a custom type attribute that the browser doesn't recognize as being JavaScript, the browser just ignores it. It says, oh, I don't know what that is. Goes past and just doesn't render anything. So it's a free tag, basically. And in there we've got JSON. And remember, folks, rules of JSON, double quotes only, no trailing commas. I hate that. Yeah. Right, the first key in this object is some CSS selector for an element. Pretend we've got a div here, it wouldn't fit on the slide with an ID of my element. This tells Magento which element we want to use, right? This bit here is just require.js module name, and it can be something that was mapped in require.js config, or it can just be a plain one that gets stuck in like I've done here. And then as the value to that, we've got this freeform object, which is a configuration object. And this is all going to match up pretty neatly, because I'm going to go back to the definition file now, which is fictitiously put it my module/js/add class. If we go back here, we can see the config is the object that we had on the previous slides. We've got that class name variable, which gets mapped to class under new, and the element is the element with the ID my element that we selected. And Magento handles all of this for you. So you just put that in your template, and your JavaScript just loads. If you're wondering where that happens, look in lib/web/mage/apply, I think it is. It's pretty easy to read code, and you can see what's going on. If you have a selector that's not an ID selector, but is, say, a class selector, you don't get multiple elements in that L variable. That's always just one, but it will call that function multiple times. So it's not like a jQuery object where you have 0 or more. You get one in there, or you just multiple invocations. Summarize a few of these things. You can request a JS component on a page as many times as you like to different areas. It will only ever load once, but it can be called many, many times. And historically, this convention of config element comes from jQuery UI, which is a fairly well-known library. And all jQuery UI widgets actually will work as JavaScript components if you just use them. And the more useful application of this is you can write a custom jQuery UI widget and use it as a JavaScript component. If you're doing something a little bit more ambitious, that feature set turns out to be quite useful. You get a nice kind of inherited structure, you get initialization with config and other things like that. And a final tip, if you want to run some general JavaScript that's not related to an element, just is some JavaScript that goes on a page, if you pass in the wildcard selector, Magento doesn't try to run your code on every single mounted DOM node, because that would be silly. It does a bit of magic and says, all right, I know what you want. You just want to run this on anything. We won't give you an element. We'll just run your code. Right. Next section is UI apps and Magento UI, and we're going to focus on the checkout, actually.
Okay, so UI app. We already talked about different elements which are actually building Magento, but UI app, this is the thing which actually puts everything together and gives you the really, really nice framework to build your front-end application. So the benefits of using UI app are, first of all, it's a normal Magento module, so you can find it in Magento UI. So you can treat it as a normal module, so you can override it and do other things with it. Also, to understand how it works, basically you give it a tree of different UI components, and Magento will render that tree for you and take care about stuff like how to connect, server to the JavaScript, how to transfer the data, and do some other operations. So basically, UI app is a way of building your front-end application. Also, what I want to mention here, and Max I think going to explain a little bit more, and I think this is a Magento naming convention issue. Basically, they have two things in the framework which are called exactly the same. They have UI components and UI components, and they're not the same.
Yeah. I'm sure everyone here has heard a lot about UI components like grids in the admin and other such things, and you find them under view / admin HTML probably / UI underscore component. You can extend them, and you've got data providers, and you've got other components, and there's a lot of stuff going on. They're pretty complicated. That's not actually what we're talking about. We're talking about UI apps. And UI components, when you get down to it, are UI apps. But so is the checkout, and the checkout is not a UI component. The Magento checkout is configured in the layout XML as a DI style constructor argument to a block, not through the UI component area. So that's a whole complex discussion that we're frankly avoiding because we don't have time to discuss all of that right now. But we're talking about a part of that, still kind of relevant. The other UI component is a require.js module. And it is kind of like the parent view model class for require.js for these UI apps. And basically, every time we mention this for the rest of the talk, that's what we're talking about. And it's like a view model, or if you're a Magento developer, I'm sure some of you have got to be, like a block, right? And it's what you extend from to basically, yeah, make your app. And yeah, I'm glad that's out of the way. We're clear on that, right?
Okay, so when should you use that? I encourage you to use it everywhere because Magento actually designed it to work pretty well with Varnish or any other static files content caching, because your application can be served statically from many locations. You might serve it from Varnish, you might serve it from some CDN. This is just a bunch of JavaScript and HTML files. So also what it does, it loads the private data through API. So you can get the data from Magento web API. For example, when you are on the checkout, it goes to Magento and gets all the shipment methods or payment methods. It can get customer address book and stuff like that. So it's really designed to be a quickly loading web application with access to external data sources and parse your templates and do other stuff for you. Okay, so wanted to show you exactly how it's done. And again, this is in the template. So Max already mentioned the script with custom type, which is passed by Magento and ignored by the browser. Again, we have a JSON there. But what's really important that you can see there's a PHP code. So this is actually how your PHP communicates with your JavaScript. So you don't need to make another calls or any calls or anything like that. You can include a PHP here, and block will return a JSON object, which is going to be passed to our JS component. Also, what I wanted to add that this JSON object, it's huge. It's absolutely huge.
It's a healthy sized JSON object, yes.
Okay, so this is our component. How it's defined. We already recognized stuff we talked about before. So we got our require.js define, and also our dependency. So this is a required dependency. You need to have it because what we're doing here, we are extending from it. So when you're creating UI components, you are not creating new component types or anything like that. You are extending existing ones. And while you're extending it, you are creating your public API. So you can do some stuff there, or you can return a string, you can return the function.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this public API. There's a few special cases in this I want to just call out. Initialize is a method that will be called when your component is created, when it's instantiated, but this is not when it's actually mounted in the DOM. But this is a great place to, you'll need to fire off some network requests to get information like your payment methods that are available or customer data, things like that. That's where you do this, and then you wait for the response to come back, then you can render it rather than a loading spinner. But if you're overriding initialize, it is super important, to call this.super. That's some Magento magic that calls the parent version of the initialize function, and turns out that in the UI component and in its parent UI element, some important stuff happens in there, so don't forget that. The next part is configuration. So at element creation time, this defaults hash is merged into your object. So you can see we've got this template field. Once initialize is called, it's one of the things that UI element does. It puts that template field as a property on the object, and we can get it with this.template. So you can put anything into this in this defaults field. It doesn't just have to be the template, but template's a great example because it's a special case. This template points to an HTML file that is linked to the view model. So your view model is linked to a template. That's how it renders its thing. And these templates are parsed by this library you might have heard of called Knockout. And Knockout uses a special binding syntax. And it's how it makes your views dynamic. So something changes in your view model and the view will automatically update, and it's pretty cool when you first see that happening. So we're going to take a look at this. We've got a super duper example, simple example rather. The narrative here is we click the button and it shows the div. So you can see we've got this You can see we've got this custom attribute data bind, and it's on click. We're going to call this show method, and this show refers to the show member function of our UI component object. So this dot show would be the method that actually ends up getting called. And ditto with is visible. It's a property on the UI component object, and we'll see in a few minutes. We'll see the corresponding implementation of this view. But this data bind is Knockout specific, and it's refreshingly well documented at knockoutjs.com. I think maybe Google Knockout. I'm not too sure on the web address. And there's bindings for all kinds of things. You can actually do quite a lot in the templates. I prefer not to. I like simpler templates myself, but they're pretty powerful if that's your taste.
Great. So Magento actually, when they decided to go with the Knockout.js, they did it for two reasons. So first of all, when you're writing code there, we are not writing a Knockout app. You are writing a UI app, and you are using some of the Knockout features to enable you to have a dynamic web page. So I'm going to talk quickly about the observables. I don't know if you ever worked with that before, but basically, you remember I talked the example on the checkout that the UI app is actually asking Magento to get all the payment methods available for the customer or the shipment methods. And imagine a situation where customer is suddenly changing the country and we need to recalculate stuff. So probably you would write some kind of event when selector will change. You will maybe make an API call or do something about it, and then we need to render it. There's quite a lot of stuff you need to do manually. And observables are actually giving that for free. So what's going on there is that the view model will receive notifications about the state changes, and the view needs to respond to these. So you can think about it as a Magento dispatch event. So basically, you get the data and you say, data has changed to everyone, and interested parties will do something with it. Your task was really just to deliver the data. So Knockout observables are data objects you can subscribe to. So this is quite important that they are data objects, they are not normal properties. And then you are notified by changes. So maybe we can show you a little bit of an example here. So obviously we removed the whole AMD part of the very beginning, like the require and the dependencies and stuff. This is the actual code which goes into the function, just for visibility. It's really difficult, by the way, to put all that code in one slide because they are really big and there's a lot of stuff going on. So what I wanted to show you here, so you have your object there, and you can see property is visible there. And this is where the old magic happens. So we tell you that it's invisible, it's a KO object, and it's observable, and we set the default value as false. So from this moment, it's visible, it's still a Boolean, but it's a special JavaScript object. And for example, what we can do here with it, we create our own function show, which will change the value of that property, but it's not this is visible equals true, but we treat it as an object and we change it to true. And at this moment, Knockout will notify all the interested parties that is visible, changed, and something should happen with it. Yeah, I think you can skip to that.
So, yeah, just calling back to the template real quick. This show and is visible does match up exactly with these. So if we configure our template like we did in the previous few slides, show gets called when it's clicked on, and then it sets it's visible to true. That notifies the template because templates in Knockout automatically subscribe to any observables when they're bound like that. Is visible changes to true, and then we see our div that says we are visible. Yay. That's a groundbreaking example, I know. Right, so I want to revisit component configuration. That field for configuration of components was called defaults, and it wasn't just called defaults because they named it defaults. It's called defaults because that actually is your default configuration. You can override it on a per component basis, and these components are configured in the layout XML. And these things can go pretty deeply nested. The syntax is like the DI XML. We're making a deeply nested array, and that will then eventually get converted into JSON, and that gets put into the UI app, JavaScript component, and then it all gets rendered. And you can look at Magento checkout block one page to see exactly how it's doing that. So this is where it starts in checkout index.xml. You reference the block checkout.root. That's the one that makes it happen. And we have to pass in a constructor argument, and the argument we're passing in is JS layout. And you'll notice I want to call out that XSI :type equals array. You need to put that on basically every tag from now on, but because of slight limitations, we haven't. So don't forget that, please. And then in that array, we've got another array called components, and that's where we're going to add our stuff today. So inside there, we've gone down into there, now we're zooming in. We've got item with the name my component. This name is very important because this is part of the name of your component. So every component that gets mounted has to have a unique name in the app. And it is actually made of the chain of parent to child to your component, all concatenated with dots. So for example, checkout.steps.shipping address is the main shipping step for you in checkout. And that's how it gets nested. This part here specifies the AMD module that we wish to use for our UI component. It should be something that extends from UI component. And this can be a require.js mapped file, or it can be just the file path old school like I've got there. The next is a free-form array of config. And we are setting the template here. Notably, I've missed a double quote on the end of template, sorry. But this gets merged on top of the defaults config. So you can override anything set in there, in here. And this time, we're changing the template. So it's going to be the same component that gets rendered, but a different HTML template. And these HTML templates, by the way, follow the same rules that require.js does in terms of mapping and loading and coming in asynchronous. They use a require.js plugin to load it as text, I think. Now, there's more. That's all in the dot, dot, dot. That's everything we just looked at. We've aligned it because we need more space. Children is important. We said it's a nested tree of UI components. Well, in this children field, this is where it begins all over again. This is where we make a new component, and we have a template in there, and we have more children in there, and so on and so on. And this field, other than this bit where it says display area, this is important because the way you access your children, we'll discuss it more in a moment, the way you access your children is with display area. It's not with the name. There are two names for this component, a kind of a local one and a global one. It's a bit more complexity, but yeah, that's the one you need, not the my dash component when you're looking at the next section.
We know it's a little bit complicated, and you might not get it the first time. We spent hours and hours to go through Magento code and JavaScript. So this whole presentation is purely to highlight it for you and try to make it easier to understand some things. But obviously there's still quite a lot of work ahead of you to go and see it yourself and try to play with it. Also, what Max said about the nested array. If you are using Xdebug, it's very much possible that it will trip over. So because the default Xdebug, I think nested levels are like 200, and those objects are going up to 500 or 700. So if you're working with Xdebug and you refresh the page and you got some nasty exception, it's probably because of those bloody layouts. So make sure you adjust your nested variable. Okay, talking about rendering children. So you can imagine this massive array of all the children, all the UI components, and you wanna, in your template, you wanna display that, render that. So the way you do it by calling get region. Max, can you come back to one slide? So basically, what Max was talking about, when you are in the template, this is what you use. You use the display area, right? Not the name, even if the function has a parameter called name. So be careful with that. Also, what you need to remember that get region, even that you are requesting a child, it will return an array. So you need to actually look through it. Even if it's a one element, you need to look through it. And in case if you need all the children, you can use these regions and you're going to get massive object.
Yeah, that's not as far as I'm aware public API, but you can look at the data structure in there and you can see why there is a reason why you get an array back every time. Find us later if you want to really know why.
Okay, so this is the actual template from Magento. You will find like loads and loads of it. And when I first time looked at it, I was like, okay, where's that get template coming from? What is that region? Where can I find it? So when you're in the template, you need to refer to your layered XML file to find it. So you're looking for your display name here. It's an array, so we use for each. By the way, this is, I think, the first time we actually presented the knockout template. Yeah. So you can see that this is the special tags knockout require, and they are ignored by the browser. So it's, they don't render or anything like that. Knockout.js pass them later. So as I said, we're looking through get region because it's an array, and then we tell knockout that our template is actually returned by this method, which is a standard Magento. This method is actually there, implemented already, you don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, and once you're inside this looping thing, it's kind of weird, it makes a new context. So get template refers to this, but it refers to the this on get region name that child component, not your parent one. So get template's getting you a different template than what you would be getting if you did it, 3 lines down.
I got pretty useful advice for you guys. If you're going to be working with the templates, there's a really nice Chrome extension called, I think, Knockout Context or something like that, which basically gives you, when you're inspecting elements, gives you additional tab where when you highlight any of these, it will show you the context. So it will show you what your data model looks like, what methods are available, what kind of properties are available. Okay, so we talked about how you can access your children from the layout XML. But there might be a situation where you actually need to talk to another component and you have absolutely no idea where is it. You just know it's there somewhere in the wild, and you want to call it. So Magento has a really cool feature. It's called component registry, and they've created a method you call, and it returns the component you're looking for. So obviously you can use it as a dependency, but you can get it and do something with it. So the registry key, the one you're calling, is the component's name with all the parents' components' name. This is what Max was talking about. So right now, we're talking about the name of the component, not the display area. Display area is for the templates, and when you want to have an object, use the name. Okay, this is a quick example from Magento. Basically, we are setting the variable here, and we're getting an object from the registry, and this is the name. So this is our UI component, and this is all the parents this component has. This is how you access it. Okay, so that will give us a really nice object we can work on. Apparently, you might get into trouble here.
Yeah, that won't work. So remember that one of the key changes in Magento 2 is that everything is loaded asynchronously. You can't guarantee loading order anymore. So when you add to the complexity of the UI apps and the way they're rendering things, and I think it does like a depth first thing on the way down, but it doesn't do that on the way up when it actually mounts in the DOM. It gets really messy, and that's why there is this registry. But you cannot depend on a component being loaded at the time you request it, because your initialize might run before Magento even knows that this other component exists. Turns out Magento thought of this. They're a smart bunch over there. Ta-da! Callback. So registry.get is exactly the same, but we pass in a function. And if that's not defined, it waits until it turns up, and then when it turns up, it puts it into an observable array and gives us a callback. And so what we're doing is we're finding the isVisible property on that, and we're subscribing to that observable with a function of our own that we've left out. Yeah, it's really handy. The canonical example for this is if you want to make a new checkout step, as a step 1 in the checkout, it turns out that the shipping step is hard-coded to be first, kind of. And you need to set that shipping step to not display if you want to put a step at the beginning. And the way you do that is exactly like this. You request the shipping step and you tell it, when you load, set is visible to false there, and then otherwise you would have both of your steps appearing at the same time, which you do not want. So, yeah, we've gone through quite a bit. This is a fairly comprehensive UI like web app framework. You could mention it in the same breath as Angular or Ember or something like that. It's a lot of code, and it integrates with Magento, so we get to write the same old XML layout that we know and love. And it integrates with the PHP, we can call methods, and then it refactors this all into a modern app. But I do want to call this out, that this is a new framework, and we've got a new application on top of the new framework. So there are new things that Magento are trying. There are best practices that are not yet established. There are bugs, right? There are things you have to do that we haven't figured out the best way to do it, so there isn't the best way, there isn't a nice way to do it yet. It can be okay. For the next 12 months at least, I would say expect to be rewriting components fairly frequently, because the best way to add something may well be to add it into the code. But that will get better, especially if when you do that, you maybe raise a pull request to Magento and say, hey, this thing's not quite right here, I made it better. And at least it opens up an avenue of discussion. So, our hope now is that bowling with Magento's JavaScript is more like getting a 6-10 split than being totally owned by Magento. So we're done. I do want to say we work for Redbox. We love it most of the time. We're always learning. We do a lot of Magento 2 and Com, and we are a growing team. If you are in any way technical, we would love to talk to you. It's enough of that. We would love to take any questions if anyone has any.
Yeah, we still got like 5, so I know it was talking to the room. So.
do you have any experience with minifying this required because in general you should, an example, if you develop required module, you should merge this together. Is this a possibility to use this approach in Magento?
Yeah, totally merging. So the question is, just so everyone here, basically optimizing front-end performance for loading JavaScript. Right now, by default, Magento will load unminified required JS modules, and it will load about 600 of them. And on first load, it can take a while. So my answer to that is minify, yes. Grunt does it. I think the frontals do it. Love the frontals. Thanks,
But can we merge them together?
merging,
into one file?
so merging is kind of an anti-pattern because merging to an extent is good, but if you merge all of your JavaScript into one file, you have a massive file, and you're loading more JavaScript than is needed on every page. So there is a sweet spot. I think there's been some research Khan Academy are doing. I think is merging modules together into small clusters that are commonly requested together, and that takes some intelligence. And that's something I've been thinking about and working on in my spare time, of which I have plenty, to kind of figure out. Can I maybe reduce that from 600 down to maybe 20, but they're bigger and more cacheable and more granular than like one file, but less granular than the sand we have of 600 AMD modules. Does that answer your question? A straight merging is not necessarily the best thing to do, especially if we ever manage to deploy HTTP2. Yes?
I just like to learn that the descriptability is built in Magento.
Yeah.
So you can do bundling, so you collect the most important files and bundle them to a couple files, like 5 files.
Shut up, bundling's built in? Bundling's built in?
Yes. So, yeah. But it was like, it had some problems. It merged too many files in 2.0. In 2.1 it was fixed. So you should try it out like in 2.1.
Why did you not tell me?
You should ask.
Oh, my research project is finished. Great.
Is there any plan to use S6 or at least the S6 wrapper?
Oh yeah, big time. I love ES6, and if you haven't used AMD yet, so maybe one day something like the Grunt will support like Babel compilation, so you can still run it on whatever the lowest browser Magento 2 supports. I don't know.
There is already a rollout that rolls out your modules to an AMD modules from S6. But the question is, do you plan a kind of, or is there a plan for a kind of interface that shows, for example, Magento components as S6 imports or modules or whatever?
No, so ES6 modules, I think, for use in the browser are still a way off, because one of the key parts of AMD is you pass that function in your modules to find a callback, and that's what makes it browser safe. And they wrote this module spec, and they haven't actually, no browser has implemented it because they can't quite figure out how to make it work when you add in the complexity of a network, when you can't synchronously load a file. So when that becomes workable, the transpilation of ES6 modules to ES5 or AMD doesn't quite work well enough, because you've got a whole concept of a default export versus named exports. So you end up with some pretty ugly complexities in there, but it's something I would like to see, yes, but we can't do it yet. I've looked.
Okay, I think we need to finish off. We don't want to take
Out of time.
time. So
Comes to me,
thank you
okay.
very much, guys.
Yeah, thank you.